Welcome and good evening to our Coping with COVID webinar series. Tonight is the first of a two-part webinar series that we have for you. Next week, Thursday, 7 o'clock, same time, same place, Zoom webinar platform. We will have our second part of this series for you all. My name is Pamela Palmer. I'm the Director of Congregational Care at Good Shepherd Church in Naperville, and I'm going to be one of your hosts for this evening's webinar.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Pete Wiltshire. I am a lay member of the Hope for Mental Health team, and I am the other co-host for the evening tonight. And I also want to introduce you guys briefly to the person who is manning our chat tonight. His name is Ken Miller. Some of you guys may remember his name from Good Shepherd. So Ken, say hi. And he's muted, I guess. All right, guys. So to start off our evening, I'm going to welcome us with a prayer. Dear God, this pandemic sure has been a lot of fun, huh? Feels like we've been held hostage in our own homes, and we've been pummeled with negativity just coming from every device. The heaviness of the moment is enough to crush our souls and destroy our resolve. And that is why we are so thankful we can turn to you. So tonight, we thank you that nothing we struggle with is impossible for you to overcome. This season is especially hard for our brothers and sisters who are battling isolation and loss and addiction. We ask you to help them realize that their struggles do not define their identity or their worth. They are your children, called by your name, and set apart for your purposes. Show them that their chains have been broken, that they can embrace your fullness of life. Give them the strength to fight back when they feel overwhelmed, and place people in their lives to support them, protect them, and shield them from temptation, and deliver them from evil. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, thank you for that prayer, Pete. It's a great way to start us out. It has been an incredibly challenging year for all of us. We were never prepared for something like this, and our lives have kind of been turned upside down. And there's been a lot of challenges along the way because the conditions of the pandemic have impacted multiple areas of our lives. And that's really why we're here tonight. We want to be able to talk through some of this, learn from some professionals, and just be able to dialogue about what we are going through and ways that we can cope and thrive and get through this time. I just want to go over a couple things before we get started with our first speaker. This event tonight and next week, our webinar series, is being hosted by our Hope for Mental Health Ministry. That team started about 2 years ago at Good Shepherd. They exist to raise awareness around mental health issues, remove some of the stigma from that, host events like this to educate and promote learning around mental health. And also our team can connect you with the local resource confidentially and safely if you feel that you are in need of something like a counselor or some additional support. You can visit our website to find out how you can connect with our Hope for Mental Health Ministry team. Tonight, we are going to hear on 3 different topics from 4 speakers. All of our speakers are going to talk back to back, and each topic will be covered for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then the second part of the webinar is going to be our Q&A portion. All of you who registered to attend submitted some amazing questions that's going to guide the content as we pose those questions to our professionals and hear from them about some of the specific things that we tonight who are here are facing. I do want to encourage you all, if you've got pen and paper, get that out so that you can take some notes as you hear from each of our speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to have our first 2 speakers who will be presenting on substance abuse and addiction. We have with us tonight Chris Tower. Chris is a recovering alcoholic and addict with over 30 years of sobriety. Chris worked in the business world doing finance and IT for over 30 years. He made a career change into substance abuse counseling in 2001. He is a licensed professional counselor and a certified alcohol and drug counselor who brings a perspective as both the recovering alcoholic and the professional counselor. He has attended Good Shepherd Church for over 10 years and serves on our Hope for Mental Health team. Chris, thank you for being here. And also presenting on substance abuse and addiction is Beth Sack. Beth Sack graduated with a master's degree from Governor State University with a focus in addiction studies in 1994. Beth became a licensed clinical professional counselor and certified alcohol and drug abuse counselor in 1996. She has worked in the behavioral health field for over 20 years. She is a therapist at Linden Oaks Behavioral Health and currently manages 3 of the inpatient units at the hospital. She has been a member of Good Shepherd for 8 years and has participated in the Hope for Mental Health ministry since it began in 2018. So Chris and Beth, thank you both for being here. We are excited to hear what you all have to bring us through your experiences and your wisdom around substance abuse and addiction.
Great. Thank you so much, Pamela. And thank you everyone for being here tonight. I'm glad to be able to participate in a seminar relating to coping with COVID, especially as we focus on substance abuse and addiction. That's been my passion for many, many years, to work with people struggling with substance use and addiction. And so I'm happy to be here tonight. Interesting enough, before we did this, got online today, I had an article come across my email from the CDC, and it was talking about the percentage of people being affected because of COVID. And it's stating that 40% of US adults in a survey taken in June said they're struggling with mental health or substance abuse issues related to COVID-19. So that's a pretty huge percentage of people that have been affected by this pandemic. And so tonight I just want to focus briefly on a little bit of clinical information about how you can tell if you possibly have an issue with drinking or drug use. And then I think Chris is going to go into some more details from there. Obviously, over the last 7 to 8 months, we've all had increased stressors in our lives. And a lot of times increased stressors will lead to unhealthy behaviors. I know there was a lot of kind of jokes initially when COVID started, people talking about overeating, people having Zoom happy hours and drinking more. And so I really want to focus more on maybe more problematic drinking tonight and not so much alcoholism. Some of those stressors that people have encountered over the last 7 to 8 months have been financial stressors, work stressors, being home with your kids, having your kids in school and having to learn online and hybrid learning, boredom, isolation. And so whenever we have an increase in stress, again, a lot of times we want to go to an increase in other behaviors. And so how do you know if you have a drinking problem? If you're questioning that yourself, or how do I know if my drinking, is causing problems in areas of my life? And so some of the things we look at is to look at, number one, are you drinking more than you intend to drink? So if you sit down at night and you have a glass of wine, do you stick with 1 glass of wine, or do you have 2 or 3? If a couple nights a week you used to drink and now you drink 4 or 5 times a week, that could be an initial sign that maybe your drinking is becoming problematic. Have you had attempts to try to cut down your drinking? Do you say, okay, I'm not going to do that tonight, or again, I'm only going to have 1, and then you still have a couple? That would be another sign. If you're having cravings or a very strong desire to want to drink or use drugs, that's another sign. And then continued use despite having social consequences or relationship consequences. So a lot of times when your substance use is occurring, you really want to see the problems it might be causing in your life. And that's how we can tell that you're developing some issues with that. And then recurrent use in situations that might be hazardous, like drinking and driving or using and driving would be an example of that. And so those are things we would want to look towards. And if you feel like you're experiencing any of those issues, you can always reach out for help. The mental health ministry, we have lots of resources on our webpage. I know I'm with Linden Oaks and we offer free assessments. Dr. Bokar is with us today from Fox Valley Institute. So we have a lot of resources in our community that we can use if you're feeling like your substance use is getting to be problematic. And again, I think initially we really looked at, the Zoom happy hours, and it kind of seemed, oh, this is kind of fun, but we've been stuck in this pandemic for a long time now, and it's not going away. And a fear I actually have is moving into the winter now, is we don't have the opportunity to be outside as much, to experience the sunlight as much. And so I do think we're going to even see more struggles moving ahead over the next couple months. Again, reaching out for help is the biggest thing that anyone can do. I know a lot of times there's a stigma that goes along with substance use and mental health issues, but we're here to help, and we want to help people to be able to develop the skills that they might need to help them not continue to drink or use drugs. You can reach out to family or friends for support. There's Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, there's Zoom online meetings. So there is a lot of support in the area to help people with developing any problems with substance abuse issues. So I'm going to pass it along to Chris now to talk a little bit more about what he might be seeing from his perspective in AA.
Thanks, Beth. I am Chris, and I am a recovering alcoholic and drug addict. And like I said, I've been sober a while, and I've been in the counseling field for a little while. And I have to say that this pandemic really scares me. And it's, you know, addicts and alcoholics are relapsing at a higher rate. You know, I think Beth quoted a statistic, and you know, I don't know, statistics in recovery are always kind of hard to come by, but I think, you know, there's no doubt that it's happening. And there's three things I think that are driving it: loneliness, anxiety, and boredom. You know, and those three things are just not, you know, a good mixture for an alcoholic. And the other thing that kind of goes away, if those of you who might be familiar with Alcoholics Anonymous or some of the 12-step programs, is this whole concept of the fellowship, you know, the ability of one alcoholic being able to talk to another, or one addict talking to another. That kind of goes away with these Zoom meetings. And I mean, you can sort of maybe hang out before and after the Zoom meeting, but, you know, it's not quite the same. And that's another thing, that people are really frustrated with Zoom. I mean, they do, I think for the most part, people do see it as a blessing. I mean, without it, where would we be, obviously? But nonetheless, you know, alcoholics are pretty good at complaining. And so, you know, there's just a lot of frustration about the way the whole Zoom thing works. And it's just not the same, you know, it's not the same. So, by the way, I came across some myths about the whole COVID and alcohol thing that are apparently out there. And geez, I hope no one is believing them. These are them. Consuming alcohol can destroy the virus. Obviously not true. Consuming alcohol stimulates the immune system. Not true. And the other one, alcohol on the breath kills the virus in the air. You know, they sound like they might be good, but, you know, come on. So here we are. What do we do about it? I mean, I don't know about you all, but, you know, back in, you know, April, I was thinking, you know, 4 or 5 months and maybe we'd be done with this. And obviously that's not going to be the case. So now, as a recovering alcoholic, and I'm, you know, what do I advise people to do? I'm sorry, but all I can really tell you is kind of double down on what you've been doing. You know, get back to the basics. Kind of, you know, I think what Beth was talking about, reaching out to other people, is so important, and it is so hard. In AA, we often talk about the 1,000-pound phone, because it's just, for some reason, it's so hard to pick it up. But we got to do it. You know, we just have to. You know, the addict's tendency toward isolation, when confronted with anxiety and loneliness and boredom and all these restrictions, is kind of, you know, that's the what's leading them to, you know, kind of sink into this isolation tunnel, if you will, which is just the opposite of what we need. So, you know, I came across this thing on isolation. This is from Chief Medical Officer at Hazelton, Betty Ford, and he said that we consider addiction a disease of isolation in the first place. So now we're isolating all these people and expecting them, to pick up the phone, get online, that sort of thing. Well, that might not work out so well. So, at least there's a little reality there. Do I have a great recommendation as to what to do if you're in this situation? Like I said, I really don't, other than to, try to get back to the basics of your program and do whatever you can not to isolate. And that's all I got. Thanks.
Chris and Beth, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. Beth, it's kind of scary that 40% of our population is struggling with either substance use or substance abuse right now because of this pandemic. And it really rings home some of the things that Chris was underlying. Don't be afraid to get back to the basics. Don't be afraid to reach out to somebody if you are experiencing loneliness or anxiety or boredom. So thank you both for those really helpful and useful tips.
Pete, can I back in one thing here? I forgot to mention.
Please do.
There's a website for District 43 that lists all of the AA meetings, and I believe that's part of what you all will be distributing tonight somehow, some way. Is that right? Maybe that's a question for Pamela.
I know that we have that information on the website.
Okay, yeah. So District 43 website is a great place to go for all of the meetings in this area, Naperville, this general area.
Thanks for mentioning that, Chris. I will have Ken share that in the chat portion, the website. So if anyone wants to bookmark that and save it for later, we do have that available for them. So thank you for bringing that up.
So our next speaker tonight is Mary Breigel. This is going to be a recorded presentation, just so you guys know. So she will not be able to respond to questions directly. But things that some of you may already know about Mary, because she attends Good Shepherd. She is an LCSW. She has been practicing as a clinical therapist for 10 years. She deals mostly with the adult population struggling with anxiety and depression. She is at Linden Oaks, and she's been there for more than 20 years. Her role there has been to lead skills and strategy groups in outpatient programs. She helps to better equip her patients who are dealing with substance abuse and anxiety and depression. She also does private practice through Linden Oaks Medical Group, treating adults that are struggling with anxiety and depression.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share the footage here of Mary's presentation. I want to make sure that everyone can hear.
Hi, it's nice to be here. I'm going to talk about change as loss. And, loss has been, actually within the last several months with the pandemic. And I just want to go over some losses that I think we can identify with. So, and then ways to get through it. So the first section I would like to talk about is how we can, get through this time. And what we need to do is name what has been lost. So that would be, identifying. It could be as simple as, I don't get to go, to parties, or I don't get to see my family. It can be, I was graduating this year and I didn't get to have a graduation party. I didn't get to go to the dance. So it's very important that we identify the specific of how that loss impacted us. And we need to allow ourselves, to feel it. I mean, as uncomfortable as it might be, it's so important to feel and experience, how that impacted us. Not being able to go to church and not being able to be with your community, it takes its toll. And I feel like, sometimes we've probably dismissed that because it's not, a catastrophic situation, but it still is part of our being. And we need to consider if there's something that we need to honor with that pain. It could just be as simple as, do you need to journal about what you've lost? Do you need to name it? Do you need to say, this has been so sad for me? Maybe we need to look at a photo of when we were with our family or when we were with our friends, and just acknowledge that's been very difficult. And we need to recognize that there are stages of loss, and it doesn't mean that you simply just go through them and then once you go through them, they're no longer there. You can you no longer have to feel them. There could be a smell or a taste of something that can bring this all back to us, and that's very difficult. And so we want to be able to manage that. And it's very important that when we do recognize that loss, that we take into consideration the emotions that we're feeling, and then we need to share that with somebody else. We need to talk to somebody. We need to recapture the times that you were with your family, and what that felt like, and how you can maybe start slowly getting back together in that situation. So it's very important to just allow yourself to be sad, and change is loss. Even a happy change can be hard because it's something that's out of the ordinary. So again, we just want to name what has been lost. We want to allow ourselves to feel. We want to consider that there's if there's something that we need to do to honor that loss, that we need to do it. And again, that could be just writing a letter and just identifying what that is. And then we want to recognize that this the loss is not a predictable process. It can happen anytime when we're not even aware of it. So that's how change can be loss. And then what I'd like to go over are just some coping skills, and the coping skills that I have in front of me actually spell out the words face COVID. So that's going to be helpful. It's an acronym, of course, and so it's going to be helpful for you to remember these skills by spelling out the words face COVID. So the first one is focusing on what's in your control. So that is, what do I have control of? And that's where you're going to put your energy in. We don't have control over the past. We don't certainly have control over what's going to happen, but we need to focus our energy on what we do have control over. And so that's the first skill. And the next one is acknowledge your thoughts and feelings. So that's the A. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to, know that some of our feelings are sad, and what happens when we're feeling sad. So we want to make sure that we are, allowing ourselves actually to feel sad. We just had talked about that. And the C is, come back into your body, which is you want to try to stay grounded. You want to try to stay in contact with the present moment. So, that might include, having your feet, just on the floor and sitting up, if you're sitting and, feeling your back against the, against the back of the chair, and just bringing yourself back. It's okay, to have, to have the sadness and the anxiety that comes along with that. But basically what we want to do is we want to bring ourselves back. We want to say, okay, what am I feeling right now? What am I hearing? What am I smelling? It's all your senses. You want to bring yourself back. And then that brings us to engage in what you're doing. So that's the E. And when you're engaging in what you're doing, you're having contact, with the present moment. You're, you can only, your brain can only manage where your brain is at that time. Sometimes we expect our brain to go, somewhere where it's not been, somewhere in the future, and it's hard for that. So that's why you're going to know what to do when you're in that situation. So you want to bring yourself back, to the moment. And then the C is the committed action. And basically that's being committed to something. It's trying to keep yourself in a normalcy of, with your family, who are you with at that moment? What can you do with that person? Who are you, what are you going to be doing in terms of can you be talking to somebody on the phone? Can you be, with that person? It's all about actually being with that person and, trying to let go of again, things that aren't happening, at that time. And then opening up, that's the O. The O is opening up. So that just means, allowing yourself again to have those feelings, and then remembering to be kind to yourself. If you feel anxious or frustrated, it's okay. Allow yourself to feel that way, but make sure that you have, again, a good support person, that you're using your skills to, again, try to bring yourself back, and just share, with a trusted person, like what am I feeling right now, and that's so important. So that's the O. It's just opening up. And then we have the V, and that's values. And values are very important. Values are what we use to feel connected to what is comfortable with us. So values, core values, are important in terms of setting goals and moving towards them. So when you're moving towards your values, you're comfortable. And the I is identify resources. What can I do to make sure that I'm very educated on what's going on? And those can be, of course, your church, any local facility that helps with any type of resources in terms of what you need, if you need anything. And I know there's been so much, so many job losses, and that's another thing. We have to be very willing to reach out to people that can help us, because everybody, God is not a favor of people. Everybody has something. So we know that, don't ever feel like you can't, talk to somebody. And then the D is just, dedicate yourself to self-care. And that would include, some self-care tips, which are eating healthy, eat healthy, and get good sleep. And that's very important for your immune system. And you need to eat regularly. That's the first tip. And then the second tip is keep moving. Physical activity is very important. It helps release stress. So that's important. If you have an opportunity to go up the stairs, go up the stairs. I know the gyms have been closed, so we really want to take advantage of taking a walk and anything that can improve your physical, well-being, and get good sleep is very important because that keeps your anxiety level low too. And that brings me to the next one: prioritize your sleep. Make sure that you are having some good sleep hygiene. Wind down, at the end of the night, end of the evening. Try not to be on social media or, looking at your phone, TV. Use this time to just relax and meditate and get yourself into a good sleep. Practice pausing. That could be contact with the present moment. We talked a lot about that. Deep breaths. Bring yourself back. We have a skill, 4 square breathing, where you breathe in, count for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, let it out 4 seconds. Do that 4 times. That's very helpful. Breathing is very important. And then we have make sure that you balance your mental intake. There's a lot going on in this world. Try not to get too caught up with the media and the news. Just try to take in a little bit at a time and just keep yourself focused, again, on what you have control over. Make things as normal as possible. So that's very important. And the 6th skill is check in on yourself and make sure that you're, doing everything that you need to do to feel, like your self-care. So check in with yourself, make sure you're doing that. Try to be curious and non-judgmental with whatever shows up. Just be just accept it and, try not to judge. And then use your supports, very important. And I'm going to give you one more acronym. It's called GLAD. So it's being grateful. Before you go to bed, name things that you're grateful for. The L is learning something about yourself. Make sure you acknowledge when you are, when you know something that's good for you or not good for you. The A, acknowledge your accomplishments. It's so important. Getting through this has been very difficult. So acknowledge that you've gotten through it. Acknowledge all the strengths and the resources that you've used. And finally, the D is find delight in something. Create your own joy, whether it's getting a cup of coffee and calling a friend, anything small. Make sure it's small. It doesn't have to be, big, just any small, texting a friend. And so that's the acronym GLAD. So gratitude, learning, acknowledge, delight, and face COVID is focus on what you have control over and acknowledge your thoughts and feelings, come back into your body, engage in what you're doing, committed action, opening up values, identifying resources, and doing self-care. And thank you so much.
Wow, that was just tremendous. We are so thankful for Mary to contribute her perspective on managing and dealing with loss. Everything from feeling all right about journaling your feelings so that you can put a name to those feelings of loss, to recognizing that it's okay to feel sad. And then so many great tips about how to stay present and stay in the moment and not let yourself indulge in those feelings. So thank you very much for that, Mary. Now our next speaker is Dr. Laura Boker. She's going to be speaking about grief in a pandemic. Dr. Boker is the CEO of Fox Valley Institute. She brings more than 25 years of experience in family and marital therapy. Her passion for helping people reach their greatest potential by encouraging growth in their lives and relationships That was her premise in founding Fox Valley Institute in 2001. She has been a guest on talk radio shows. She has been a speaker for numerous organizations on a variety of related topics. She has authored magazine articles, and she has been published in a variety of journals. Dr. Boker received her doctorate in counselor education and supervision, and is also a licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed clinical professional counselor, as well as an approved clinical supervisor. Welcome, Dr. Boker.
Thank you so much, Pete. Wow, I have someone pretty difficult to follow, but I really appreciate all that Mary brought up. And what you'll find for tonight for me is probably some add-ons and some overlays. So it will just reaffirm some of the things that Mary said. And I just want to thank you, first of all, for inviting me here for this seminar webinar. And thank you so much, Good Shepherd Church, for making it happen. It is so needed at this time. And I so appreciated what Rich and Beth had to say about addictions. Just a great reminder for all of us. And I think I'm going to mention that in part of my coping too. So grief in the pandemic is a little more complicated than grief that we're used to. The grief in the pandemic is complex, and it has trauma added into the pain, which makes this time very painful and confusing for all of us. So let me first define trauma. It's a traumatic event that causes physical, emotional, and psychological harm to someone directly or is caused by seeing it happen to someone else. Trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event, and I think we can all call this COVID virus a terrible event. Let's define grief. Grief is an acute emotional, psychological, or physiological pain that accompanies loss. So with one or more losses, the grief becomes complex. So combine complex grief with trauma, we have a lot of different emotional, physical, and cognitive reactions happening out there. And those are some of the things I want to identify tonight. One, so we can make them normal, and then talk about what we can do about them. Some of the losses Mary mentions, and there's a lot of losses, so forgive me if Mary or I have missed one or two. There's just a ton of them, but the most important one is death. The loss of someone that we love and we're close to, but yet the loss is we aren't able to have closure with them. It's someone that we aren't able to say goodbye to in person, hug them, touch them, kiss them, and celebrate their lives. And I think that's the most difficult loss one can have during this time. And anybody who has lost someone during this time, I am so sincerely sorry. It is just horrible. Because another thing that makes it so horrible is that the support that we're used to having when people leave us is the people to gather around us to support us during this time and help us through the grief. And by not having that also adds to trauma. So it just keeps kind of piling on. The other loss section that we have is our social connections. And Mary mentioned a few of these. One is attending church. You know, it's so difficult to not be able to go pray with your pastor or laugh with your pastor, or your friends at church, or to serve at church like you're used to. What about concerts? I'm hearing that people are really frustrated that they can't go to the concerts that they've been waiting to go to, or a sports game. And the educational systems, we've lost those social contexts, though we can't see the people that we are at schools, the kids, my heart goes out to them. That's where they meet their friends and make friends. And the college kids who were so excited about making new friends there, and they're shutting them down, but they're doing their best to reconnect. Gyms, having a workout partner, missing those. Restaurants. How many restaurants have we not been able to get into? And if we can get into them, they're very limited in space. Colleagues, I know in my office we have team meetings, but they're all on Zoom, and I miss that in-person connection and laugh with them or hug them or touch them or kid around with them. And this time for social connection is hardest for the extroverts, and my heart goes out to the people who are just crave, that's their survival, is to be around people. Now I do have a few introverts in my office, and they say this is what they've been living for, that they're kind of enjoying this alone time and not having to deal with all us extroverts out here. So, but they do miss the social connection when you get down to the heart of it. The other thing, and Mary mentioned celebrations. We celebrate one's life at a wake, right? What about the proms and graduations, weddings, births, promotions at work? Those are all the things that we hold on to and just take true to heart, and are able to look back and smile. And those are the things that are sad, that we aren't able to have those. And again, huge, huge losses for the people going through that. And what about just some standard freedoms? Losses of freedoms. And I'm mentioning all these because sometimes we just are getting used to these, but these are part of the add-ons to the grief, which makes it complex. So the freedoms are standing less than 6 feet apart. I don't know what's going to happen when you only have 5 feet, but they make it very serious. Wearing masks. You can't go even in my office or any stores without saying you need a mask to come in here. And I love that some people make it more of a fashion statement, which is lovely, but it's taken away one of our freedoms. What about buying certain items at certain times? I know I go into grocery stores and sometimes the paper towels are still out, or the wipes to wipe down things are now the hot item. What about going to in person into a doctor's office, dentist's office, or even a therapist's office without getting your temperature taken, or having to answer 6 questions, or having to just, again, have the mask on? Or what about gathering over 25 to 50 people? You're limited to, depending on the location. Again, our freedom is lost by just even being able to stop at a friend's house. And it's because people are taking this differently. Some people are welcoming people to come in with or without a mask, and some are saying, no, I'm keeping my space clear and clean. So not until this is a virus, that a solution has come, I don't want anybody here. How about the freedom to travel? Travel anywhere you want, anytime you want. It's not, we don't have that freedom anymore. And even as simple as writing with a pen and having to put it in a container that says used pen. I just feel dirty sometimes when I'm doing that. It's like, oh, I don't know. How about being safe in the environment, and where we have to stand 6 feet distance in the store? We have to wear the masks. Even the stores have the limited numbers to come in. You're not just a customer, now you're a number, and they count you when you leave. How about the continuously you having to wipe your hands and clean your hands? I know we were just in Traverse City last weekend, and every single store you step into, you need to do the hands cleaner. So it's not just once, it's every store. What about the unknowns about the world and our future? The losses of knowing. Here, for example, hearing the increase in the virus in different places. What does that mean? I don't know what that means. I just heard deaths are gonna double by February of next year. What about having to quarantine 14 days after you visited a state? I think Wisconsin, I think, is one of those. Or if you come back from Wisconsin, you have to quarantine. Or what about the ability to travel to different countries? Some of them won't let us in because we're from the US. I mean, it's just a whole different world out there. And we are kind of getting used to it, but not. Our bodies aren't, our minds are, our psyches aren't. Some of the most important ones are the sense of security. That's like the bottom, the start of our Maslow's laws, right? Satisfying some of the basic needs. One is financial. Financial, if we lose our job, how do we survive financially? What about the occupations when careers are ending now, or people are having to retire because of the pandemic? Relationships, I can tell you that my caseload for marital therapy has increased exponentially because of this. Relationships are in real trouble right now. People are wanting to divorce. When you read about divorce attorneys, can't make enough time for the clients that are knocking at their door, it makes me sad because relationships, this isn't the time to do that. This is a time to realize that it's not the real world and there's unusual situations happening. What about housing? When we are continuing, can we continue living in the home that we're living in if we lose our income? What about people who've lost their homes because they can't afford it? Food, one of the basic things. I'm on the board of Loaves and Fishes here with one of the local food pantries, and I have seen the overwhelming increase of people who need the basic thing of having food, needing food, the kids having food. And one of the, again, simple things, but it's daily routines. Daily routines is one of the things that keep us healthy, but when things keep changing, it's churches opening so we can go to church, but there's only a certain number, or work calling you back to work, or e-learning and you go to school or not go to school, and the teachers in and out. It's gotten so things aren't defined well, and that just causes more stress and anxiety for everyone. So some of the basics about grief: it's normal and a healthy reaction to loss. It's necessary, yet it's painful, complicated, and multi-layered. And there is no right way to do it. An important thing to remember, though, it does have an end, because all the things that we're going to go through when we grieve, we want to integrate those into our lives. We don't want to push them out, cut them out, or throw them away. They will be a part of us, and we'll want to integrate them. Now, people handle grief differently. It depends on, one, the age. Children handle it differently than adults. Past experiences, meaning if someone has gone through the depression, they're going to handle this a little different. It may be more of the same for them, some of it. Social support. Social support is one of the most important things that we need to get through this, and how we handle it will depend on how much social support that we have. Prior stressors, if we had lost a job prior to this and we then have the pandemic, and then if we lose a loved one, we'll handle it totally differently than if this is the only thing that we're handling at the time. If we have a history of mental illness or an addiction, then we will handle it a lot differently than someone else. Now, some of the reactions that are occurring with trauma and grief: one, some of these were mentioned before, sleep. Sleep will increase or decrease, but sleep is one of the most important things we need to take care of. If we don't have sleep, it affects everything else in our world. Eating, increasing, decreasing during this time. Low libido, if you aren't finding that yourself being wanting to be intimate with your spouse, it's not unusual. It's happening during this time with the stresses. Increased muscle tension. The tightness is due to the stress, which is going to increase other pains that we have in our bodies. Some of the emotional reactions. Anger. We have seen some of the anger out there recently on TV, which I hope people aren't watching very much of. But anger, if I see someone angry, I know there's either sadness or fear underneath that anger. Anger is a secondary emotion, not a primary. Anxiety, fear, apathy, depression, guilt for not doing enough, guilt for being healthy, guilt for being able to make money when others aren't able to. Impatience is a big one. Withdrawing from others, which isn't the best thing to do during this time. Sadness, hopelessness, feeling disconnected. Loneliness, this is something we need to address in the coping skills. Uncertainty, shock, helpless because we don't have the answers. Nightmares aren't unusual, and mood swings. Well, if that's not enough, let's look at the cognitive reactions. Difficulty concentrating. Yes, if you're forgetting things or you can't focus, yes, it has to do with some of this. Obsessing about a loss, if it starts going in a cycle, in a circle, and you can't get out of it, don't think you're unusual. Excessive search for answers by watching too much TV. Too many times people are watching too much TV because they're wanting to know when this is going to end. When is there going to be an answer? When is there going to be? Limit your TV time. Difficulty making decisions, difficulty problem solving, poor memory, so don't hesitate to make lists. And if you have any self-destructive thoughts during this time, please seek help right away. right away. It's out there, it's available, and it's a lot easier to access than ever right now. So how do we cope with grief and trauma? And I think with just the things that I listed, you could see why it's kind of feels so messy. There's so much that can be going on physically, mentally, emotionally, and then put them all together. Sometimes people don't know quite what to do. So first of all, as Mary had mentioned, acknowledge it, name it. And once we name something, then we know what we can do with it. And then bring comfort to that part. So if you acknowledge that you're feeling sad or you're tired, if you're tired, go take a nap. Like, take care of what you're feeling at that time and accept it without feeling judged. Do not put judgment on yourself. Reach out to others and share your pain, and do not downplay it. It's very important, because some people say, yeah, you know, no big deal. Yeah, it is a big deal, and share it with someone. Journaling can be helpful. Some people love journaling. Some people hate journaling. Journaling, what it does, the importance of it is that if we don't get it out of our head, it's going to grow like cancer. So when we're able to put it down on paper and we're not talking about the computer, journaling, do it by hand. It's much more effective to get the emotions out, and they can stay on the paper and not be in your mind. And I encourage people, when they're journaling, put a time on it, 20 minutes a day, and go on with your life. And if something comes to mind, know that you can go back and say, oh, tomorrow I have my 20 minutes. That's when I can write it down. So you have control of it, and it doesn't have control of you. Be mindful. I know Mary mentioned that. Mindful is being present, being in the moment. If you're thinking ahead, that's anxiety. If you're thinking in the past, that's depression. So you want to stay here in the present. Eating healthy, of course, exercising, or I like to use movement. Mary used that word as well. Exercise feels like you're supposed to run a mile or 10 or lift weights. Just go walk down the hall. Walk, like Mary mentioned, up and down the stairs, but just move. Limit your time with the TV, watch your alcohol intake, and Beth did a great job in stating what you need to be watching for. One thing, have gratitude for the things that you have. If you're healthy, be grateful. If your family's healthy, be grateful for your church, for your kids, for your home, for your job. Gratitude and fear can't live in the same space. So if you're being grateful, you will feel better. The other thing that's very powerful is helping others. Give during this time. It's priceless. Giving can mean volunteering, it can mean donating, it could be supportive calls. But when we focus on others, we get the focus off of ourselves, which is a very healthy way to cope. Do something different, try something new, gardening, new language, write the book that you've been wanting to write, get a dog, whatever you think would be something new and different and make you smile. This one is really, really important. Reach out to others. And don't just say, okay, no, you need to be proactive about that. And proactive means making a list. Making a list, who you're going to call, text, or Zoom that day, whether it's one, but you need to be proactive about it. Because isolation does not heal. And isolation or social distance does not mean social disconnect. And it does not mean emotional distance. It doesn't mean emotional distance. And reach out for professional help if you need it. Again, it's much easier these days than ever before. Now, I want to leave you with the most important thing, that if you don't remember anything about my presentation, this is the one thing I want you to take away. Ready? There is no greater gift you can give someone who is grieving than to ask them about their loss. Ask them about their loss and truly listen. Thank you.
Dr. Laura, thank you so much. I am so incredibly grateful that you were able to speak about grief tonight. It looks very different for people right now because of the pandemic, and so much of that has come across my desk and people I've been meeting with. I just really appreciate the level of compassion that you brought with that conversation. And I'm so grateful for the tips and just the acknowledgement that what makes this harder is that we have that access to support isn't easy anymore. And all of the different losses and changes that we're going through makes our grief so much more complicated during this time. So thank you so much for everything you brought, just a wealth of resources. And I want to thank all of our speakers for presenting tonight. I'm sorry that Mary couldn't be here live with us. I'm grateful to her that she was able to record her presentation so that we could watch that. The topics we had covered this evening are so incredibly relevant, and I hope that so far everyone has had some things that you have taken away and can apply to your life moving forward, so that this year doesn't have to be a loss for us, but that we can find some way to survive and thrive during this time. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and transition us over to our Q&A portion, where we get to hear from our speakers and ask them questions. Most of you have submitted questions ahead of time when you registered. You'll notice there's a Q&A button here in the webinar if you've located that feature. If a question pops into your heart or mind during the rest of our webinar, please go ahead and submit that through the Q&A. We're going to try our best to get to all of our questions with the last bit of time that we have here. We are scheduled to end at 8:30, so we're going to begin our questions now. And we received some questions around just some general coping skills. And so that's where I'd like to go ahead and begin with. So a couple questions that came in were around loneliness. Specifically, the question is worded this way: how can we cope with loneliness, and more specifically, a lonely living situation? And Beth, I was gonna give that question to you if you're all right with that, and you can jump right in.
Great, yeah, thank you so much. It's so interesting because in Dr. Bokar's presentation and listening to Mary, a lot of what I'm going to talk about, they've already addressed too. And a lot of that was, if you're feeling lonely again, is being open to challenging those feelings. Don't suppress them. You really want to be able to identify them and acknowledge them. You want to be aware, as Mary and Dr. Bokar both talked about, just kind of what you're feeling, how it's feeling, what's going on in your body. You want to be engaged, you want to be active, you want to be participating in what your values are. That's important to help you not feel as lonely. And self-compassion was another huge part that you want to look at. You don't want to judge yourself. Again, if you're feeling lonely, if you're feeling grief, if you have guilt, you can acknowledge that you have that feeling and try to move forward from that. Gratitude was something else on my list, and Dr. Bokar hit on gratitude. Very, very important. And I agree, you can't have gratitude and fear and worry all live in the same place. And I think the biggest thing, and what I keep hearing everyone talk about, is the importance of reaching out. You need to connect. You need to have community, even in this time of social distancing and maybe not being able to be right in the same room with somebody, but reaching out through your church, reaching out to friends and family. You need to be able to ask for help. You can't assume that they're going to know you're lonely and that you need someone to talk to. And so being able to kind of be accountable for that and being willing to kind of take that risk and reach out it would be very helpful when you're feeling lonely.
Thank you, Beth. I appreciate that. I don't know if anyone else has anything more to add about that. I know that, you know, people are really struggling with that loneliness, and, you know, the isolation can even cause a level of hurt, right? Why aren't I hearing enough from my loved ones? Have people forgotten me? And people are really feeling that way as well. I wonder if there's anything that, you know, one of you would like to say around that when we've just kind of been feeling hurt and lonely, and is there any way to sort of get through that?
Just a couple more things, again, is reaching out for help, being willing to let somebody know that, hey, maybe if my family hasn't reached out to me and contacted me, that was hurtful, and reaching out to them and just asking, again, for support, for help. As Dr. Bokar also said, counseling services, they're so available. Virtual counseling, almost every practice within our area has virtual counseling. You don't have to leave your home if you're uncomfortable with that. I would also suggest, if you're comfortable enough, and I forget who mentioned it, get together for coffee with somebody. You can still sit 6 feet apart and have coffee if you're comfortable with that person. There's things you can begin to do to be in small groups with people and still be safe. And so I would encourage you, if you don't have too much anxiety about that, to try to put yourself in some situations around people in person and not just on the phone or Facebook or Zoom.
Thank you, Beth. We have a question on grief for Dr. Boker. So let's say we are experiencing waves of grief that kind of come crashing in out of nowhere. What are some of the coping strategies that you would recommend?
Well, first of all, if I was seeing that person, I would predict it for them. I would let them know that expect it, that it's going to come and it's going to knock you over, and that don't let it be a surprise, and that you'll end up being a puddle, but that's okay. And the one thing that you can do again is just identify it, name it, and get your needs met with it. So if it comes and it is that you're just so tired, then go take a nap, take care of yourself, and rest. So it's paying attention to your body. And then if it's feeling lonely, call a friend, but be kind to yourself and just let it be okay. That's something that's going to happen when you're grieving. And I always like to mention, and there'll be an end. There will be an end.
Thank you. So you touched on this a bit during your discussion, but if you could try and expand on it a bit, related to grief and sadness when you're not able to mourn with family and friends over the loss of a loved one.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think sometimes we just get used to doing things one way, and the funeral, or being at the funeral home or being at a wake, is the typical way that we would celebrate life or grieve the loss. But it isn't the only way that we can acknowledge it. There's many other ways, and it can be at any time. So it's really being able to allow yourself to do it later on. It's not that the love won't be there any longer. You will love them through that. So if you have to wait to gather with many people, if you want to do that, your love will be there and you can celebrate at that time, or you can have a smaller group. And it doesn't have to be at the funeral home. It could be any place.
That's great advice. Now, what about if you know that one of your friends has lost a loved one? Is there anything that you could recommend for a friend of someone who's experiencing that loss? As how to support your friends or your family members?
Ask them about the loss. Ask them. Let them tell their story over and over and over again. Check in on them and let them know you care. So.
Thank you. And then I have one other follow-up question for you. Now this is related to grieving over how the holidays are going to be impacted by the pandemic. But especially, I guess, for people who are also grieving the recent loss of a loved one.
And I'm sorry, the question is?
So, what tips would you have for someone who is saying, oh my gosh, I lost a loved one this year and now my holidays are going to be ruined?
Yeah, I think one thing that is beautiful is that everybody probably has heard the 5 stages of grief, and there's a 6th one now, and it's called finding meaning. So what that stage is doing is asking people to look at more at the love and not the pain of the relationship. So, and by doing that, it's really not forgetting them or cutting them out or forgetting. Like the simple example would be, for happiness, happy thoughts, it's like a Teflon pan. It slides right off, we don't remember them. But if it's negative, we tend to be like Velcro and it sticks. And those are the things that remember. So it's painful and we're thinking the holidays are going to be hurtful. What we want to do is look at the things that brought us joy and happiness and all the good things about the person that we lost, and let it sit with us and be with us so we can bring them into our lives, and not just remember the painful things, but remember the good. So, and find meaning in that. And we can only do that internally.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got a question for Chris and Beth now. And this is about substance abuse and addiction. So, and this is related to supporting a family member. So what are some of your tips for supporting, family members or friends who are in recovery and living with you when other members of your household are not willing to give up their habits?
Sure. That's kind of a tough one, because you would hope that who's ever living with you, who's ever closest to you, would kind of support what you're trying to do in your recovery and trying to stay sober. And it can be really difficult to do if people around you continue to drink. But the bottom line really is your recovery is your responsibility. And so you have to identify other ways as the person that's sober or in recovery that you will be able to remain sober even living in that household. So an example I would say is if you're a parent living in a household with an adult son who's is in recovery, if the mom or the dad maybe continues to drink, having that other parent just support them, validate their feelings. Like, this must be really tough that mom or dad continues to drink and, isn't either willing or thinking, again, it's not my problem. I don't have a problem with drinking, so why should I have to stop that? That's kind of a common thought that a lot of family members have. And if there's at least somebody in that family that still supports that individual, or even reaching outside of the family, again, to a sponsor, through AA, if you're in counseling, and really, we look a lot of times in the hospital for a safety plan for relapse prevention, a safety plan for your depression, because really the responsibility is going to lie in you as that individual. But just validating that person's feelings that it might be really hard if someone around you continues to drink as you're trying to remain sober.
Thank you. Chris, do you have any perspective on that?
Nothing to really add to that one. No, I mean, I think other than to say that that situation is pretty much the same with or without COVID, right? Except that with COVID, you're going to have more people indoors, more likely. But the whole concept of having someone, in the family drinking and so on, it can really wreak havoc on a household and on a family.
So then, Chris, what are some of the things that that we can do to decrease the temptation to drink more during the pandemic?
When you say we, are you talking all of us?
Well,
the alcoholic, and I mean, really, for the recovering alcoholic, I tend to want to go back to the things I said earlier about, trying to get back to the basics. One thing that I heard yesterday, which I thought was really good, and someone did mention it earlier, was watch your consumption of TV news. Because, I mean, if you stay glued to whatever you watch, CNN or whatever it might be, you're going to get upset probably. And because I've found myself doing that a little bit. So I would, definitely try to be careful with that. And I like the idea of, just, trying to do something new if you can. But again, I think the most important thing is the getting away from, preventing yourself from isolation. That's reaching out is just so important.
Thank you.
I could just add one other thing with that too, is just trying to look for some healthy alternatives. Like we talked about, finding something new or finding a hobby, finding projects at home, kind of distractions would help with that temptation. And if there's projects you can work on, I know over like last spring and before we got into the summer, I really got into doing puzzles, and I haven't done puzzles in years, but it was a good distraction. It was something that really I had to be mindful and present to do. and it really helped me. I got a few already bought for going into the winter here. So hopefully, but finding hobbies, alternatives, exercise, even if, again, a lot of the gyms are opening up, but if you're not comfortable to go to the gym, if you have some exercise equipment in your home, if you can do a Zoom exercise class, there's lots of different alternatives now. Social media has, could be a curse in some ways, but it's also been very helpful during this pandemic. So those would be some things to lessen.
And then the other thing I would add, I almost forgot, is any of these things that you can do that help someone else, you get paid double for that, right? Because you're helping them and you feel good yourself. And there's a lot of things we can do to help other people on a daily basis, even during this pandemic. So, I always try to, keep that in the back of my mind, that if I can do something to help somebody else, I usually get more benefit from it than they do.
Thank you.
Did you want to ask me about that statistics question or no?
No, I think that I'm going back to Pamela now.
Okay.
So we did have a couple other questions come in during the webinar that I want to get to as we are just about to wrap up here. Someone asked if we could talk a little bit about just the heightened fear and anxiety that people are feeling, and ways that we can kind of navigate through that and figure out how to not let that consume us.
And I'm sorry, Pamela, the heightened anxiety and fear?
And fear, yeah, that so many are feeling. We can relate. Whoever asked that question, we can relate to that.
Yeah, and it almost feels like people are feeling like that's normal these days. But I think it has to do, as I mentioned, when anxiety is present, it's usually because we're thinking about the future. We're worrying about what's ahead and trying to figure out what's ahead, and where's the answer. And just as I'm talking about it, my anxiety is going up. So it's really trying to come back and look at what's present, what's happening now, and what do we have control of? Because that's where the fear and anxiety comes from, is we're feeling out of control and looking ahead. And it is, we don't know what's ahead. We don't know. So let's pull it back and take control of what we do know and what we can control. And again, live more in the present.
And I guess I would just reiterate again, limiting the TV time, looking at reliable sources. I mean, a lot of times you hear these statistics thrown around and things like that, and we don't know where they're coming from or what the sources are. So having reliable sources, and again, limiting the TV time between we have COVID and we have the election and we have riots, and there's just so many things that are very much anxiety producing and fear producing, and limiting that. And again, trying to focus on gratitude or finding something else. I think the one day I put on Little House on the Prairie, and I'm like, oh, this is great. Simple. You don't have to really think, and it just is relaxing. So that would be some other ideas.
That's wonderful. Did anyone else have anything to add?
My parents told me that they love watching Anne of Green Gables. So that's also an oldie but a goodie.
We're all finding our own unique coping skills with this time, that's for sure.
Thank goodness for Netflix.
That we've had come in for tonight's webinar. Again, I just want to reiterate my gratitude to all of you who were here to speak and present on these topics. We had so many people submit questions, because truly we're feeling the weight of this season and of this year. And so I am just beyond grateful that each of you were able to bring what you're experiencing, all of the wealth of education and background that each of you bring tonight. I know that all of us have a lot going on in our minds and lots of takeaways that I hope we can really begin to apply to our lives. And trying to find that sense of peace. I know for me and many of us, trying to get connected and stay connected to God as well. Our faith is a huge part of how we can get through this time. And I know I've had lots of conversations around that fear and anxiety that people are feeling. And somehow, finding that support in our faith and in the people that we have in our lives really does make a difference. And Chris, I appreciate a comment you just spoke a little bit ago where you mentioned, you know, when we help somebody in this time, when we make that call, when we check in on somebody, it's a blessing to them, but it also blesses us that we're able to actually do some good in the world right now. And it can be as small as reaching out to our friends, but it can also then escalate from there. We're volunteering safely, because I know that there's a lot of organizations that are able to be up and running again to make sure people are getting food and basic needs and the resources that they need right now. So, so thank you again to all of you. I'm so grateful for all that who attended this evening. Thank you for the questions you submitted, that you have hung in there and listened to our dynamic professionals that presented tonight. We do have one more webinar next week, 7 o'clock, same time, same place, Zoom platform. We're going to have new speakers presenting on different topics. So our conversation again is going to be continuing as we delve into how the pandemic conditions are impacting our lives. I do want to end tonight with a blessing for everybody. So join with me, if you will. Go forth into the world in peace. Be of good courage. Hold fast to that which is good. Render to no one evil for evil. Lord, would you give strength to the faint-hearted, support the weak, help the afflicted, and may we love and serve you, our Lord. Let us rejoice in the power of the Spirit, and may the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit